In this one, Ana Kasparian confirms that free-thinking Americans were right all along, although the mainstream media that serves the left and the Democratic Party was telling us otherwise. As you might know, it seems that Ana Kasparian has reverted back to being a loyal Democrat, demonstrating how hard it is to leave the cult that is the Democratic Party. Fortunately for us, the mainstream media left apparatus is falling apart ever since Donald Trump won this last election, and more truths are being exposed. Now let's have a look at Ana Kasparian admitting the truth about the economy that the American people knew all along.
We've seen sort of like, it's like this missing puzzle piece a lot of times, or even though we're getting positive information about the economy, voters still don't feel good. If people just feel bad, even if the metrics are telling us things aren't bad, does it feeling bad hurt Harris just because she has been in this administration for the last 4 years?
In today's economy, voters' vibes battle with clear-cut data. This is bizarre. It's not connected to reality. And the Wall Street Journal is exactly right. It's so much misinformation spewed out there that people are believing the lies, even though their own economic situation is good.
But was it? Was their economic situation good? Because it turns out their economic situation wasn't good. And the metrics that were being utilized to determine whether or not the economy was working well on behalf of the American people were not the right metrics to focus on. In fact, they were skewing the economic outlook to make it appear as though things were much better than they really were. And Democrats called it a vibe session and accused people of not understanding how good they had it when Joe Biden was president. So let's get to the details of what was really the case. So look, if you go by the traditional economic metrics, unemployment rate was at a mere 4.2% in November. Real GDP rose 12.6%. Productivity improved and inflation fell from 7.2% in June of 2022 to 2.4% in November of 2024. But Eugene Ludwig, who's the chair of the Ludwig Institute, he named the institute after himself, didn't he? It's okay. I'm not judging, but Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity, and also a former U.S. comptroller for the currency, disagrees with the whole vibe session narrative. And he talks about it in his latest piece for Politico titled, "Voters Were Right About the Economy. The Data Was Wrong." And look, this is something that drove me crazy as well. And I wanted people to understand. And when I say people, I don't mean voters. I mean the people in positions of power, the Democrats, the media. You guys are focusing on the wrong metrics. And when you tell people who are struggling economically that they just need to shut up and feel grateful for how awesome the economy is, that leads to political backlash. And I think Democrats suffered from that in this last election cycle. So at the Ludwig Institute,
Now that I think we all can agree with. The mainstream media was out here telling us that Biden's inflation numbers weren't nearly as bad as they were. They were telling us the unemployment rate was fine. Meanwhile, ignoring the fact and discrediting the American people in that we recognize how much more our gas bills are, the cost of fuel to fill up our cars, our grocery bills, insurance. I mean, everything across the board. I don't need to continue listing things, but they're like, no. Everything's fine. Look at the numbers. And now we're coming to find out that those numbers were lies.
So at the Ludwig Institute, he assembled a team of researchers to delve deeply into some of the most frequently cited headline statistics. And what we uncovered shocked us. The bottom line is that for 20 years or more, including the months prior to the election, voter perception was more reflective of reality than the incumbent statistics, but not because of some nefarious plot. He says that the data that was collected by government agencies was accurate and that most of the staff at these agencies were well-intentioned, but the filters used to compute the headline statistics are flawed. As a result, they paint a much rosier picture of reality than bears out on the ground. So let's start with unemployment. He uses unemployment as an example of a statistic that does mislead in multiple ways. So first, it counts as employed the millions of people who are unwillingly underemployed. That is, people, for example, who work only a few hours each week while searching for a full-time job. Second, it does not take into account many Americans who have been so discouraged that they are no longer trying to find a job. Finally, the prevailing statistic does not account for the meagerness of any individual's income. Thus, you could be homeless on the streets, making an intermittent income and functionally incapable of keeping your family fed, and the government would still count you as employed. So that's how the statistics get skewed. And I have more examples that were provided in this excellent piece that I highly recommend you guys all read. But John, I want to stop and get some comment from you.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I think it, as you pointed out, like, you use the metrics you have, but you should also always be hoping that they will be the best. You should be updating them and all that. And it's sort of, for years we've gone back and we've said, like, very often these analyses will focus on like whether the stock market is doing well, which is an indicator of the economy, but also pointless for people who don't have any stocks. Like, it's what do you include in your equation is super important. And so they should definitely update that. What the Biden administration could have done is, at the very least, so long as those metrics, even if flawed, are consistent over time, you could potentially talk about improvement. But don't tell people, like to what Joe Scarborough was saying, regardless of whether you think the metrics are good or not, it's hardly a good strategy in any event to tell people that they're wrong about their perception of their own economic situation. Like, how the hell could that possibly ever work? That said, there is definitely a component of how people feel about the economy that isn't 100% about their own raw evaluation of their own condition. And we can see a version of that play out basically every time power switches hands. I mean, you've probably seen the charts where like people's evaluation of whether the economy is good, like Democrats after Trump won, it nosedove, and for Republicans, it went up. They didn't suddenly get richer. I mean, Elon Musk did, a few of them did, but most Republicans didn't get richer, but now they suddenly think the economy is better, even though it's from one day to the next. Now, you have to dive into all that. You have to see what they think about their own condition, what they think about their area, and also the country at large. And, with all the money they have flowing in these campaigns, they should be able to do all of those and tailor their messaging to fit.
Yeah, and look, I will say this. After a newly elected president gets inaugurated, the partisans and hyper partisans who supported that party that is represented by the president are going to they don't want to say anything negative, right? They're so elated that they're going to support and say glowing things about the economy because they want to support the guy they voted for. But I think an important indicator of how Americans, including Democrats, were feeling were the polling that ended up showing how terrible Democratic voters were feeling about their economic situation while Biden was in charge. And so it was frustrating to hear from members of the media and Democratic politicians who just kind of brushed that off and pretended as though these were people who didn't know what they were talking about and the economy is great. And by the way, I think part of the problem is, especially in Congress, we're talking about so many millionaires who are so disconnected from what Americans are experiencing on the ground. And I think that disconnect makes it difficult for them to message about what the reality is, right? Or even acknowledge what the reality is. And by the way, if you filter the statistic to include unemployed people who can't find anything but part-time work or who make a poverty wage, roughly $25,000 a year, the unemployment rate or the percentage is actually 23.7%. That is insane.
Well, I'm glad Ana Kasparian is willing to admit that. And to add to her last point about the disconnect from leaders in our government who are now all rich somehow, is that they don't have any problem lying to the American people, and the American people recognize it. It's been 8 years of onslaught from the left, and people on the left are recognizing it. They're waking up. They're saying, hey, look, as somebody who supports you, has voted for you, I'm out here struggling. What are you going to do for me? And then they watch some congressman get on TV and lie and say that inflation is fine, that unemployment is fine. Meanwhile, we all know that Joe Biden went out and basically cut off the oil supplies and handcuffed the oil companies, then went and sold our reserves that we stocked at a low price and then tried to restock them at a higher price. Bad decisions compounded by bad decisions. And for Democrats, the only way they know how to fix things is by throwing more money at something rather than evaluating the problem. They also made the government bigger, right? So they're adding jobs by essentially hiring 78,000 IRS agents and everything else that they did. They wanted to hire more judges to facilitate the illegals coming across the southern border. I mean, countless more federal jobs, which are going to try to help their numbers, but it doesn't help the American people one bit. And I do want to mention one good thing that Donald Trump has accomplished, or at least has happened under Donald Trump's presidency, and that is that the House actually passed a bill that blocks future presidents from banning oil drilling without Congress's approval. So no more can a president sign an executive order like Joe Biden did and completely destroy America's energy industry. It's little things like that combined with the transparency that we're seeing out of Trump's current government and Doge as they expose the government waste. They're very transparent, like I said. Donald Trump is talking to press more per week than Joe Biden did in his entire 4 years. Elon Musk is out there doing the same. And I just don't understand how any of these Democrats nowadays can be pro-Democrat leadership, right? Donald Trump is getting so much done for the American people. Right now, standing with the Democratic Party means you stand for higher taxes, means you stand for government bloat and wasteful spending. It means you are pro-open borders, amongst many other things, some of which are still yet to be discovered because Doge hasn't looked at it yet. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I'll remind you can catch me live every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday on this channel with the Jar Openers podcast. I have a Discord that you can join. The link is in the description. And other than that, thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you guys in the next video.